Hello and welcome to episode 14 of The Australian Runner, a weekly show about running and everything running related. I'm Ben, and with me is Chris.
Hello everyone.
This week's episode is all about caffeine, what it does and whether you should use it. Let's get started. Almost all of us have caffeine regularly, whether it's through coffee, tea or energy drinks, but most of us don't even consider it when we're talking about athletics. So Chris, can you tell us what caffeine actually is?
Caffeine is a substance found naturally occurring in a whole variety of different plants in the leaves, seeds and fruit. It's widely consumed, as you said, in tea and coffee, guarana, energy drinks and the like. Caffeine is most commonly used to improve mental alertness, but it has many other uses. It can be also used to treat headaches, amongst a myriad of other health disorders. But it is one of the most commonly used stimulants or ergogenic aids amongst athletes. Several studies have demonstrated that you can receive an improvement in exercise performance in endurance activities after a caffeine has been ingested. Because of its potential use as an ergogenic aid, its use in sports is regulated by most bodies.
So caffeine is a stimulant. It stimulates the central nervous system as well as the heart and muscles. It has a glycogen sparing effect, which basically means that fat is metabolized early in exercise, letting the body use it as its primary fuel source. Usually it costs the body too much oxygen to use well, so this usually occurs in the first 15 to 30 minutes of exercise. And by utilizing fat as a fuel, this allows the body to spare glycogen, hence glycogen sparing, for when exercise gets harder. Caffeine also stimulates respiration, increases urine production, and increases the permeability of muscle cell membranes to calcium ions, thereby improving muscle contractility. All of that means that muscles are better at contracting, basically.
So yes, you've just gone through the effects that it has on the body, but all of these help to improve performance. The most notably, that glycogen sparing effect that you just recently mentioned enhances endurance performance in 1 hour activities by up to 20 to 50% following ingestion of varying doses of caffeine from 3 to 13 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, which was done in one study. And that enhanced performance was found in both elite and recreational athletes. By delaying muscle glycogen depletion, this enables the athlete to go harder, longer, faster, and perform better before fatigue sets in.
Yeah, and that's something that's obviously very useful to anyone doing any sort of athletic performances.
Yeah, distance running, and that's what we're mainly talking about here at the Australian Runner. It's very specific and can be very helpful.
In fact, in 2008, the International Journal of Sports Nutrition and Exercise Metabolism found that a dose of 5 milligrams per kilogram of body weight of caffeine resulted in more total weight lifted in a chest press exercise. And earlier on in 1996, a study found that caffeine ingestion can be an effective ergogenic aid for exercise that's as brief as 4 to 6 minutes.
It just highlights how caffeine can be used for those shorter periods of exercise as well as endurance. Furthermore, caffeine can also help you after exercise and enhance the recovery procedures. Muscle glycogen can be increased and return to normal levels faster when a carbohydrate drink contains caffeine as opposed to normal. This assistance in the recovery process helps speed up the recovery and will help to make next day's workout so much more productive and better.
So those are the positive effects. Basically, it lets you run harder for longer, and it can also improve your recovery as well. But there are some cons. Probably the biggest downsides of using it are headaches. I've definitely gotten a headache a couple of times if I've had a few cups of coffee more than I'm used to having. But also it may increase your blood pressure, which obviously isn't very good at all.
Also, as we said before, with muscle glycogen and blood sugar levels, it can disrupt them, and that can be another side effect, as well as gastrointestinal issues. the too much caffeine can affect those processes.
Another one of the downsides is dependence. So, because of its effect in the brain, you do form a physical addiction to having caffeine, which means that if you keep having caffeine, let's say 1 cup a day of caffeine, you'll really notice it if you skip your daily cup of coffee. So that's just something to keep in mind. Obviously, the other side effects aren't that bad at all, so that headaches. Maybe check your blood pressure if that's an issue for you. But generally speaking, the side effects aren't bad. But it's just something to keep in mind that it is a physical addiction, not a mental addiction.
Yeah, the last thing is that caffeine's a diuretic, and it's been suggested before that caffeine leads to dehydration. But more recent studies have shown that body hydration during exercise was unaffected with caffeine intake. So dehydration shouldn't happen as a side effect of taking caffeine.
Yeah, that's a big thing that a lot of people talk about, and in our research for this episode of the Australian Runner, we haven't found that to be accurate. In fact, I came across a study by the US military where they gave some of their soldiers caffeine and some no caffeine, and then just looked at how dehydrated they were at the end of the day, and they found no difference between the two.
Yeah, but some of the time also with exercise, you're having drinks that contain caffeine amongst other things, and that water as well. So as long as you're drinking your regular amount of water and liquids during exercise, it shouldn't be a problem. These side effects that we've just mentioned were rare in studies with doses at or below 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, but became prevalent at higher doses such as 9 to 13 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. So we've just spoken about those doses, 9 to 13 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. But what does that actually mean in a practical setting?
To compare some doses for some regular ways that you get caffeine, an instant coffee would have about 70 milligrams, an espresso shot about 110 milligrams of caffeine. A cappuccino or a latte, there's really a wide range because you can get a double shot or even a triple shot sometimes, but anywhere between 110 to 280 milligrams, and that's a really wide range, so that just shows you how much variability there is with those sort of drinks. You can get it through black tea as well, and that's generally fairly low, between 25 to 120 milligrams of caffeine. And we can compare that to a tablet of no-dose, which is about 200 milligrams. You just mentioned how the side effects became prevalent at about 9 to 13 milligrams per kilogram. Assuming a body weight of 70 kilograms, if you had 9 milligrams per kilo, you'd be at about 630 milligrams all up, which is about 6 espresso shots. So you have to drink a fairly large amount before it really becomes noticeable.
Yeah, it really is excessive intake, not just regular.
Yeah, you really have to be pushing the limits.
Yeah, you do.
And an interesting tidbit that the lethal dose, or the LD50, is about equivalent to 90 cups of regular instant coffee. Nobody's ever died from drinking too much coffee. There have been recorded deaths with people eating pure dried caffeine, and also tablets, which segues nicely into, Chris, you want to talk about the difference between getting caffeine through coffee or supplementation?
Yeah, we've all heard those media stories about how some elite athletes have no-dose tablets and then they have sleeping tablets as well to regulate. So it's well known in sporting circles that a lot of athletes take no-dose tablets. But is it really worth it? We just mentioned before that they have 200 milligrams of caffeine in them, so they're really high-powered and strong. You can get them from chemists and supermarkets. They're available just over the counter, so they're really easy to get your hand on. One report compared the effects of caffeine in this tablet form to the same amount of caffeine in coffee. So they had 2 mugs of strong coffee within 10 minutes, the same amount of caffeine, and the effects were quite interesting. It found that in the tablet form, the usual performance effects occurred, but when taken in coffee form, there was less of an effect on performance, even though the blood caffeine concentrations were the same. One of their theories was that the wide variety of compounds in coffee negated the usual performance benefits.
And that's something you'd basically expect as well. If you're going to have a pure form of the drug, it'd be much more efficient than mixing it with sugar and water.
So, tying up some loose ends, we'll just give you our recommendations on whether you should take caffeine before exercise.
So basically, we've discovered that there are a whole range of different performance gains, especially in endurance sports like distance running, but even in sprints as well, there's definitely an effect there as well. The side effects that we spoke about, like headaches, are usually only present in large doses, so generally speaking, they should be very easy to avoid. In fact, the Australian Beverage Council recommends that you keep your caffeine intake under 400 milligrams per day, and we just mentioned that you'd need about more than 600 milligrams to get some of these side effects.
Yeah, more specifically to running, I think it would take about 800 milligrams to actually breach WADA, ASADA, and those types of guidelines for too much caffeine in the urine samples that they can collect.
And mentioning WADA and ASADA, you should also check your sanctioning body to make sure that you're falling within the legal limits for your sport.
But overall, definitely caffeine is a performance enhancing legal drug. It's 100% safe provided you stay within some guidelines, which is quite easy to do. And I always like to have a strong coffee, which is like 2 heaped instant teaspoons about 1 to 2 hours before a race. And I feel that works for me. I feel alert, I feel energetic. I don't know whether that's just mentally I feel better, but it seems to work for me. Note that that's well below the 200 milligrams from the no-dose tablets, but as you become desensitized over time, and might have to start taking more and more to get the same effects. And I mean, everybody's different. There's great variability in individual responses. So some people will feel the effects earlier, like me, and not need to take as much.
So at the end of the day, we both think that caffeine is a great, safe, ergogenic aid that you can use to your advantage before you race. And that finishes the first half of the show about caffeine, and now I'll pass it over to Chris for the week's news.
Alright, fair bit going on this week. It was the second weekend of the Victorian State Championships, which were held at Lakeside Stadium in Melbourne. Rio Olympian Ryden Cowley demolished the field in the 5,000 metre race walk with a time of 20:48. In the women's under-17 200 metres, Mia Goss won the title with a time of 24:13. She has already qualified for the Youth Commonwealth Games in the 100, 200 and 400 metre events. In the women's open division for the 200 metres, Madison Coates won that title to go with her 100 metre title from last week with a solid time of 23:82. The men's open 200 metres was a tough contest, and Michael Romanen claimed gold with a time of 21:54. The women's open high jump saw Eleanor Patterson claim victory with a modest height of 1.85 metres. The men's open 800 metre race saw Christian Davis claim the Victorian title, while South Australian Dylan Stenson was the first across the line in a time of 1 minute 49.25. In the women's open division, it was New Zealander Angie Petty who won, with Annalise Ruby in second and finally Victorian Georgie Griffith third. Lizzie Heading built upon her nitro athletic success, landing just shy of the World University Games qualifier of 6.28 metres when she jumped 6.20 metres to win the state long jump title. In the men's hammer throw, 2 former junior superstars squared off as Ned Weatherly threw 61.38 metres to Jack Dalton's 58.79 metres. Anthony James appeared to jump to perfection, jumping 7.46 metres, a personal best of 8 centimetres, which was just enough to clinch the state title ahead of Nathan Deslands and Paul Parker. Queensland had their Carly Beattie Shield meet, which included their 10K state championships. The winner of the women's event was Jackie Sodden with a time of 36.02, and in the men's event it was Aidan Hobbs with a time of 32.22. The 4x100 metre team of Alex Hartman, Jack Hale, Tom Gamble and Trey Williams ran 39.25 during this meet. They should be firmly aiming at next year's home Commonwealth Games on the Gold Coast, as well as the World Relay Championships to be held next year in the Bahamas. Tom Gamble also took to the flat 100 metres and ran a time of 10.33. In South Australia, they had their club versus club event finals series over the weekend, where there was an impressive array of results. Internationally now, and Josh Harris ran 2:17.08 at the Lake Biwa Marathon, Japan, which is a 3-minute PB and a World Champs qualifier for London later in the year. During most of the news segments, we've been focusing mainly on Australian athletics and athletes, but overseas there was the European Indoor Championships run in Belgrade, where Laura Muir won the women's 1500 metres in 4:02, leading the whole way, but then backed it up, winning the 3000 metres in 8:35 with a 60-second last lap. Great running from her, from Great Britain. And that's the news for this week.
Thanks for that, Chris. That's it for the show this week. Thank you everyone for listening. You can find us on iTunes and YouTube as The Australian Runner, and check us out on Facebook and Instagram too. See you next week.
See you then.